Hi everybody, this is Miriam. How you guys doing tonight? I'll be reading tonight True Bigfoot Encounters of Sasquatch Saving Humans by Jeremy Kelly. Hope you guys can follow along if you have the book. Seems like a real fascinating one, so I'll go ahead and start. For every single Bigfoot believer, there are countless skeptics. There are literally thousands of Bigfoot accounts that date back over 1,000 years. Are we expected to believe that every single account is a misidentified animal, a hoax, or a lie? At what point do the numbers demand attention? Well, I've seen Bigfoot, and I know with a certainty that an encounter can only provide Bigfoot is real. The vast majority of Bigfoot encounters are happenstance, brush-ins with the creatures. These encounters are often described as brief and usually end with Bigfoot non-cantily disappearing into the woods. However, peppered amongst the thousands of encounters are a select few that are truly noteworthy and memorable. They range from violent and terrifying to the friendly and amazing. This book is a collection of the accounts in which the encounters are not only peaceful, but where Bigfoot either develops a long-lasting relationship with the human, or in some cases save the human's life. In characterizing the behaviors of these animals, it is imperative that these accounts are acknowledged. Anyone who has read my other books knows that I have focused a great deal of my research on more violent side of Sasquatch encounters. However, some of the most spectacular and amazing encounters are peaceful. It is my belief that Bigfoot is an intelligent and complex animal with very varying personalities influenced by personal history, just like human beings. It is my belief that there are several peaceful and friendly Sasquatch roaming the world, and I believe they have saved the lives of humans. Animals saving humans are not as uncommon as one may assume. There are several cases where dolphins, dogs, gorillas, and even cows have saved human beings from certain danger or death. I hope you enjoy following accounts. As also my hope that these accounts shine a much needed light on the peaceful side of Sasquatch. Welcome everybody who has joined us. Okay, Chapter 1, Young Jenna's Camping Trip. It was 1975 in Oregon's Willamette National Forest, and young Jenna was sitting in the back seat of the family van on their way to a fun weekend of the camping outdoors. Next to Jenna sat her sister, and in front were her mother and father. The family made the long trip down Highway 58 to one of their favorite camping spots in Salt Creek Falls, an area known for old lava flows. Jenna and her sister spent the majority of the first time playing while their parents set up camp. After a fun night of roasting marshmallows and telling campfire stories, the family hunkered down for bed. The girls had successfully convinced their parents to let them spend the night under the stars in the open and crisp night air. The two girls snuggled down in their cots, kissed their mother goodnight, and watched her disappear back into the tent with her father. Within 30 minutes, everyone was asleep, but not for long. Jana was a notoriously light sleeper and found herself awoken in the middle of the night by the sounds of something rummaging around the campsite. Assuming it was her father, Jana sat and sleepily called out to her dad, but got no reply. The fire had burned to nothing more than a hot bed of embers, casting a soft and faint orange glow on the campsite. Jenna's eyes were already adjusted to the darkness as she was able to make out her surroundings. It was then that she witnessed their unexpected visitor. On the far side of the campsite, across the campfire, Jenna saw a massive figure walking around on 2 feet. Jenna had never seen anything quite like it, and having heard her father speak of bears several times, but never seeing one in real life herself, she assumed it was a bear. She watched as the creature rummaged through the camp. The creature was massive and covered in hair. Jana recalls feeling no sense of fear. Despite the creature's immense size and stature, she knew intuitively, could sense that the creature meant her no harm. She watched as the massive creature walked over on a large bucket of fried chicken the family had accidentally left out. The creature took a piece of chicken and started eating it, then looked over at young Jenna as though to acknowledge that it was fully aware she is there and awake. Jenna and the creature's eyes locked. The creature's eyes shimmered through the darkness like mirrors reflecting a yellow red. In hindsight, Jenna admits she should have been a bit unnerving. However, at the time, she was overwhelmed with an extremely powerful sense of warmth and comfort coming from the creature, which she described as almost paternal. The creature finished the chicken, looked at Jenna again as if to say goodbye and goodnight, and then disappeared into the surrounding woods. The following morning, Jenna's father discovered the empty bucket of fried chicken. He was irritated that his wife had not packed it up the previous night and was busy reiterating how important it was to store the food to deter animals, mainly bears, from entering the campsite when Jenna sweetly reassured him that it wasn't a mean bear. "What do you mean? Did you see a bear?" her father asked. "Yeah, but he wasn't a mean bear. He was really tall, too, and walked like this." Jenna impersonated the awkward gliding gait of the creature she had seen the night before. "He was just hungry, I think. That's why he came last night." "Don't you mean he walked like this?" Her sister was now crawling around on all fours around the campsite, making growling noises, impersonating a bear. "No, he walked like this," Jenna adamantly stated as she once again stuttering around the campsite, impersonating the bipedal walk of the creature. "Sure, honey," her father said with a big warm smile. He chalked up the bipedal bear to the overactive imagination of a child and went back to work, bear-proofing the campsite. Later that afternoon, the family ventured into the woods for a hike and some family fun outdoors. The young and anxious explorers ran off ahead of their parents like children often do and discovered a large hidden area full of hardened lava flows. They were busy playing a game when Jenna's sister froze. "What was that?" she asked. "What was what?" Jenna replied. When Jenna looked to her sister, she discovered an extremely frightened child. Her eyes were wide, her jaw had dropped. She was trembling like a newborn baby lamb attempting its first step. Jenna then heard the ruffling of leaves behind her, coming from the tree line, when she witnessed her sister's skin change to 3 shades lighter. She then let out a scream that sent chills down Jenna's spine. Jenna's older sister went into self-preservation mode, and somehow during her fleeing, she managed to knock Jenna off her feet, into the air and onto the ground, where she hit her head hard on a rock. Confused and in pain, Jenna found herself lying on the ground with blood streaming out of a considerably large gash on the side of her head. She could hear her sister's screams growing distant as she fled in terror, leaving her little sister behind. She then heard another sound, a much closer sound. Coming from the tree line behind her were the loud sounds of something very large walking towards her. She watched from her lying position as a massive hair-covered foot appeared a few inches in front of her face. Once again, she was filled with a warm sense of comfort and safety that she had felt the previous night. Her bear had returned. Jenna felt herself being lifted high in the air and cradled into the massive arms of the huge creature. Slowly and carefully, the creature carried the injured little Jenna like a fragile newborn baby. Every step felt soft, as if the creature was walking on the clouds or gliding above the ground. Before she knew it, she was safely laying on her cot back at the campsite. She looked up to her rescuer and saw the face of a creature that seemed part man, part monkey, or ape. Jenna smiled and thanked the creature, who reciprocated with a long drawn-out, low, bass-filled purr. Once again, Jenna was filled with an incredible feeling of safety and security. She turned on her side and fell asleep in her cot. Jenna was awoken by two extremely worried parents and a remorseful sister. They had searched for her throughout the woods for several hours and were heading back to camp to go get help when they discovered Jenna sleeping in the cot. Relieved to find her alive, they were still extremely confused as to how she had gotten back to camp. Jenna then explained to her parents that the bears from the previous night had carried her in its arms all the way back to camp. Not knowing what to make of Jenna's story, her parents found themselves concerned that a stranger had followed their two girls into the woods. They started asking several follow-up questions. How tall was the bear and what color was his skin? They asked, assuming she was mistaking a man for a bear. He was taller than Daddy, but I don't know what color his skin was. It's covered in a lot of hair. Did he say anything to you? Daddy, bears don't speak. Jenna's parents rattled off several questions before settling on the fact that she was safe and well, which was what really mattered. Of course, her parents didn't believe her story entirely. That night, Jenna slept comfortably. Under the stars in her hearts of hearts, she could sense that her protector was close by, keeping a watchful eye on little Jenna. To this day, Jenna claims it is the most vivid memory she had from her childhood. Today, the adult Jenna knows beyond a doubt that she was rescued by Bigfoot. Chapter 2. It was the mid-1940s and the world was still rebounding from World War II. Bugs Bunny had made his television debut earlier in the decade, and in a few years the Roswell UFO incident will begin fueling generations of up-and-coming conspiracy theorists. Despite everything going on in the world at the time, young Connie was terribly bored. She hailed from a well-respected and wealthy family in Idaho. Every weekend she piled into her father's airplane with her mother and father to make the voyage to her family ranch house by air. The ranch house was located near Salmon River in rural and remote Idaho. Her father employed a man named Hiram, who ran all operations at the ranch during the week with his loyal and trusty German Shepherd. There was always a lot of work to get done on the ranch, which kept her father and mother very busy, leaving poor Connie extremely bored. However, there was a silver lining in that Connie was also free to explore the ranch unhindered by her overprotected mother. By the end of the first summer at the ranch, Connie knew the terrain of the ranch backwards and forwards, or so she thought. The following spring, Connie discovered an amazing little hidden and secluded spot on the ranch. It was a stunning location full of natural beauty. It was well past the tree line and deep in the forest that was adjacent to the ranch house. Hidden by thick brush and densely woven trees, Connie's secret haven was a small valley full of lush greenery with a beautiful spring that ran through it. It was love at first sight, and it quickly became Connie's favorite part of the ranch. Connie had been visiting the hidden valley every weekend for weeks. She hunted crawdads in the creek catch and release, of course. She climbed the tall trees, crawled through the tall grass, and every now and then took a dip in the spring. It was heaven on earth for an adventurous little girl. It was Connie's little secret. That was until she discovered that she wasn't the only ranch resident who visited the hidden valley. One day, while sitting on a large log, taking in the warm spring air, Connie heard something in the nearby trees at the top of the valley. She watched as an extremely large creature ventured out of the thick brush and into the open valley. To say she was startled would be a gross understatement. She immediately thought it was a bear because of its size, but when it walked into the clear view, she realized it was not a bear at all. What she saw standing in front of her in the valley was a massive creature, a creature that seemed to be a cross of a giant man and a gorilla. It stood between 7 and 8 foot tall. Long, stringy white hair covered its entire body, with darker hair covering the more exposed areas. Its eyes were squinty and its face was flat, with its nostrils opening outwards, exposing its two large nostrils in plain view. Connie found herself in a fight or flight moment and was just about to flee the valley when the creature slowly advanced towards her. As the creature neared Connie, she found herself feeling an overwhelming sense of safety and warmth. It was emanating from the creature as though to reassure her that she wasn't in danger. The creature, which Connie sensed was a female, neared the young girl in a very maternal approach. Connie immediately felt at ease with the massive creature. Connie sat next to the creature on a large log. The creature reached over and gently wrapped her long, hairy fingers around Connie's small little hand. To Connie, it seemed extremely natural, and she squeezed the giant's fingers tightly and spoke to the massive creature, who would respond in kind with low, deep tones, nods, and occasional grunts. Whether the creature understood Connie's words is unclear, but Connie claims that there is no doubt that the two communicated. Where the communication lacked in words, it more than compensated in an emotional exchange. Connie was able to sense its feelings, and the creature was able to sense hers. After 30 minutes of sitting on the log, a second creature emerged from the thick brush. The demeanor of this creature was not warm and loving, but was full of anger and irritation. It was very evident that the new member of the threesome was not happy that Connie was there. As long as Connie started to feel uneasy with the new arrival, the large female stood up and started sneering at the second creature. Connie watched as the female quickly put the larger male in its place, who sheepishly changed his demeanor. It was evident from watching the two creatures' interactions that they were most likely mates. Over the next 5 years, Connie spent every weekend at the family ranch in her hidden valley. Every time, without fail, her friend with her moody mate in tow would emerge out of the brush and spend the day with Connie. After the first few years of Connie's surrogate woodland mother introduced her to a third member of the party, a shorter, roughly 5-foot tall, and playful version of the two adults, the creature's offspring. Connie couldn't deny the motherly relationship that she shared with the large female creature. It was always quick to put the larger male in his place whenever he acted out, which he did often. Over time, the male eventually warmed up to little Connie, and even though he kept his distance for the most part, he became much more gentle towards the little girl. Unfortunately for Connie, her father unexpectedly sold the ranch in the early 50s. The surprised and sad Connie never had the chance to say goodbye to her furry forest friends, but she is extremely confident that today the youngest one still roams the remote and primitive wilderness of Idaho as nature intended. Connie's encounters predate the Bigfoot hysteria that spurred from the Patterson-Gimlin video of the 1950s. At the time of the encounters, young Connie had never heard of a Sasquatch, and the world had never heard of Bigfoot, because the name had yet to be coined. She told her mother about her forest friends, who gently told the young girl to stop telling stories. As a result of not being believed, Connie kept the creature secret and only told her story in her adult life. An overactive imagination cannot account for several years of weekend encounters. Connie still vividly remembers her forest mother and hopes that the young offspring has grown into a healthy, safe adult Sasquatch. Chapter 3: Hypothermia. Who hasn't had an unexpected car issue pop up at the worst possible time? A flat tire on your way to a job interview, or perhaps the air conditioning cops out during an exceptionally hot summer vacation. Luckily for most, these incidents are few and far between, but for poor Jordan, it has become an unfortunate common occurrence. Jordan is a 29-year-old. He is happily married to a wonderfully down-to-earth woman and the proud father of 3 children. He originally hails from the beautiful and sunny coast of Southern California, where he grew up in San Diego. After having his fair share of the daily rat race that is Southern California, Jordan and his family decided to move to northern Nevada so they could enjoy a more relaxing pace of life, and so that his wife could be closer to her family. The only downside of their new living situation is that Jordan's place of work is a 4-hour commute through very remote and rural Nevada deserts. Because of this, Jordan spends the work week near his job and the weekends with his family. This means that every month Jordan drives the 4-hour commute 6 times or more, at least until they can find a house closer to his job. To make matters worse, Jordan has been having a slew of car problems. It is early 2012, and the car trouble started at the end of 2011. Only a month into the new year, Jordan has already had a tire shred to pieces while driving at a high rate of speed, which almost sent him into an uncontrollable spin, which he fortunately managed to avoid. Shortly afterwards, the radiator on the same truck blew to pieces, forcing him to borrow a friend's spare truck. If that wasn't enough, the alternator on the truck he was borrowing kicked the bucket. Being a hard-working, old-school mechanic, Jordan dealt with the issues as they rose and on the fly. This had always been Jordan's modus operandi. It was a great plan until it wasn't. Jordan was on his cell phone, busy discussing weekend plans with his wife. It was 8 p.m. and he had just started driving home for the weekend. Now, having already driven this route several times, Jordan was aware of the location of every gas station on the drive home. He made sure to check his gas tank before leaving, and he was confident that he had enough gas to get to the first town and fill up. Turns out he was wrong. Jordan was traveling for about an hour when the unthinkable happened. He ran out of gas, leaving Jordan stranded on the side of a remote interstate highway. Over the next few hours, Jordan did his best to try and get some help. He tried flagging down car after car, each of which simply increased their speed, leaving Jordan to watch their rear lights disappear in the distance. Eventually, a police officer drove up and Jordan got him to stop. Right when he thought his ordeal was over, he discovered that the cop was not too keen on helping him out. After Jordan pled his case with the officer, he was pretty much told to figure it out himself. A tough luck scenario. As if that wasn't bad enough, the only tow truck company that serviced the area refused to drive him to a gas station or bring him a can of gas for a fee. They would only tow his truck at full price. Hours passed and the desert night grew steadily colder. Jordan inventoried his belongings and found that he had 2 very light blankets. He was without a jacket or any source of heat, and the temperature had already entered the teens. Right when he was sure that he had a long night ahead of him, a Nevada Highway Patrol officer pulled up. Luckily for Jordan, the second government employee was much more inclined to protect and serve than the police officer that had left Jordan to figure things out on an isolated desert road. The friendly highway patrol officer gave Jordan a lift to the nearest town a few miles down the road. Things were finally turning around for Jordan, but his ordeal was far from over. As soon as he finished filling the gas on the gas can, the highway patrol officer received an urgent dispatch call and was forced to leave Jordan behind at the gas station. With no ride back, Jordan started the long trek to his truck in the frigid desert night. It was a long, cold, and uncomfortable walk back to the truck. When he finally arrived, he hurriedly poured the gas into the empty tank and hopped in the driver's seat. He put the key in the ignition and turned. Click, 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 click. The battery was dead. It was well past midnight at this point, and the temperature was now hovering near the single digits, and cold, harsh winds recently whipped through the desert terrain. Jordan finally decided to throw in the towel and pay for his car to get towed into the town. He unsuccessfully tried several times to contact the tow company, but every call was left unanswered. When he finally managed to contact the tow dispatcher, she informed him that their on-call driver was too tired to get out of bed and come help him. After a short heated back and forth, the dispatcher hung the phone up on Jordan. If ever the writing was on the wall, it definitely was now. Despite his many efforts to get back to his family, it looked like he was going to have to spend the night outside. He looked over the truck, assessed his situation. The driver's side window was locked in the down position. He had 2 blankets that were more comparable to bed linens than blankets, and no jacket or any other winter attire. An adult is susceptible to hypothermia on land if they are exposed to several severely low temperatures, especially at high winds. The flesh will freeze at 10 degrees Fahrenheit with 15-mile-per-hour winds. With the wind and frigid temperatures well within the danger range, Jordan's main concern for the night was keeping hypothermia at bay. He called his wife and told her that he wouldn't be able to make it home until the morning, and then he hunkered down in the rear seat of the truck, prepared himself for a long night. Jordan was busy trying to stay awake and remain active to keep his body temperature up. But as the night grew longer, he found himself having a more and more difficult time staying awake. It was then Jordan felt the car start to rock side to side. He sat up and looked around, but saw nothing for miles and miles. Nothing but darkness and cold were around. He lit his cigarette and started to inspect around the car. The area was just as vacant as it had been 20 minutes earlier. He climbed back in the truck and under the thin blankets. It was around the time that Jordan noticed his hands were uncontrollably shaking from the cold. He tried his best to control the shaking, but he couldn't. He was losing heat quickly. Jordan pulled out his phone and tried to stay awake and kill some time by playing a few games. It wasn't long before he grew tired of the phone games and decided to put the phone away. It was 2:20 a.m. at that point. Jordan was maneuvering his arm and hand to slide the phone into his pocket when he noticed the cell phone lights reflecting off the passenger side window. The glow disappeared when he slid the phone into his pocket, but what he saw instead of the light's reflection shocked him to his core. A mere few feet away from Jordan was a face looking back at him. It wasn't a human, it wasn't a dog. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't anything he had ever seen. He blinked a few times and looked back out the window. There was nothing there. Being a very rational man, Jordan was much more inclined to believe that he was hallucinating and at the risk of hypothermia. It made a lot more sense that a huge ape-man was staring through his window. Despite his best efforts to stay awake, Jordan started drifting in and out of sleep. He woke up and had an uneasy feeling that if he fell back asleep, he may never wake up again. He looked out the front windshield and to his utmost surprise, he saw the same face looking back at him from the front of the hood of the truck. He sat up to get a good look at the creature, but when he looked out the window, there was nothing there. I'm losing my mind, Jordan thought to himself. He was relatively familiar with hypothermia and was confident he was experiencing the confusion and hallucinations oftentimes associated with it. With every second that passed, Jordan found himself fighting harder and harder to stay awake. No matter how hard he tried, he was overwhelmed by the desire to just close his eyes and sleep. He laid back down on his side, fighting the urge to sleep, but eventually he gave in and closed his eyes. Shortly afterwards, he got the uneasy feeling of eyes on him. The feeling that there was a presence, with his head resting against the side panel of the open driver's side window. Jordan slowly opened his eyes. As soon as his eyelids parted, a figure started to take shape in his vision. Standing a mere matter of inches from his face was the creature Jordan had been seeing. Jordan didn't move. Instead, he slowly lifted his eyes while keeping his head still. Soon he discovered he was looking up at a massive Sasquatch. The creature's chest topped the GMC Envoy's hood, which stood about 6'5". Shock consumed Jordan, who instinctively jumped backward in fear, which led the Sasquatch to hide from Jordan's view. Holy explicit, I'm not hallucinating, I just saw something, Jordan said to himself in surprise as he sat up fully awake and lit a cigarette. The temperature was now officially in the single digits. Cold winter wind constantly shuffled in and out of the truck. And Jordan's hands were still shaking. He watched help disappear in the distance as a few trucks drove the isolated highway without stopping to help the stranded traveler. He peered over to the center divider, which was a 20-yard wide ditch, and he saw a massive dark figure move. He was in the desert. There were no bushes, no foliage, and no animals that he could see. There was something there with him. Feeling much more alert and awake, Jordan slumped into the driver's seat and watched the creature from a distance. The creature then started to speak or make noises. If it was speaking, it was a language that Jordan had never heard before. As he put it, it sounded like a predator talking gibberish and gurgling. It was coming from the creature hiding in the center divider. Again and then again he heard a garbled gibberish. Soon Jordan found himself mustering up all his strength to stay awake. The last thing he remembers before the morning was garbled gibberish coming a few feet from his car in the front of the hood. He then slipped away into a cold sleep. By 6:32 a.m., the sun had risen and the cold desert night was yesterday's memory. Jordan woke up to a Nevada highway patrol officer, not the same from previous night, who thought Jordan had frozen to death. The officer helped Jordan with a jump and followed him to the town to make sure he could fill up and get home. After a night of a lot of no's and tough luck, Jordan finally lucked out and was on his way home thanks to the NHP officer. Over the following weeks, Jordan tried to make sense of what happened to him that night. Luckily, his wife knows him for the honest and grounded man that he is, and she never hesitated to believe him. Later that day, they inspected the car and discovered massive hands and fingerprints in the places you would expect someone to grab a truck to rock it back and forth. Jordan is a large man that stands well over 6 feet, and his hands paled in comparison to the dusty handprints on the truck. As the days passed, Jordan started to get a good grasp on the events. He played the events over and over in his head, became consumed with researching Bigfoot, and started listening to the many audio tapes available online of the creature's speech. It wasn't exact, but it was extremely close to what Jordan heard the night on the highway. Every single time that the Bigfoot made its presence known, Jordan was moments away from falling asleep. The car was rocked back and forth right when he was about to nod off. The creature was next to the driver's side window the second time he was falling asleep. It appeared the first time right after he had woken up from the car being rocked. The more Jordan thought about it, the more convinced he became that the entire reason he had an encounter was because Bigfoot was trying to keep him awake. Whether the creature was intentionally keeping Jordan awake to keep him from suffering hypothermia is a question that will never be definitively answered. However, from the thousands and thousands of accounts available, we see that this Bigfoot's behavior was very different. Most encounters are brief at best, and those that do last a period of time usually include a Bigfoot stalking the human, establishing territory, or the very rare occurrence of a long-term encounter, one that spans months or years. For a Bigfoot to spend an entire night by the road at the same place and make its presence known, just enough to keep Jordan awake, really makes one wonder. I have long thought that Bigfoot is a highly intelligent creature, less so than human, but more so than known apes. And this behavior suggests some higher level of brain functioning than we are normally accustomed to with animals. Whatever the reality of this encounter is, Jordan is convinced that he owes his life more to the Bigfoot who kept him awake than the NHP officer who drove him to town. His family members are also grateful to the desert Sasquatches of Nevada. Next chapter, Petting Zoo. The individual who had this encounter prefers to remain anonymous. For the purpose of this encounter, we will refer to him as Will. He is a respected farmer in Texas and does not want the unnecessary attention that would come with a Bigfoot encounter. However, he has had one of the most interesting encounters I had ever come across. It was August 5th, 2001. While we were asleep in our warm and comfortable beds, Will was already hard at work. It was 3:13 a.m., and the early bird farmer was driving his large tractor down U.S. Highway 287, about 30 miles west of Palestine, Texas. Will preferred driving his tractor on the highway in the early hours of the morning when the roads are relatively empty. He was cruising at a good speed at around 65 miles per hour, and he was using his high beams on the empty stretch of highway. Will was ahead of schedule and making great time when his high beams illuminated an object on the road in front of Will. Will slowed his tractor down to about 50 miles per hour and blocked any potential oncoming traffic from hitting the creature. From what he could tell from his distance, it was a bear cub or a very large dog. Will slowed his tractor to a crawl and then eventually stopped about 20 yards from the creature and turned on his four-way flashers in the interior spotlight. He was positioning the spotlight to shine down on the creature in the road when a large bipedal creature, which he referred to as the popular cryptid Bigfoot, walked from the soft shoulder and into the road right in front of Will. The large male Sasquatch, Will was quite certain from its demeanor that it was a male, shielded its face as it passed in front of Will's tractor. It was clear to Will that the creature was not covering his face from shyness, but rather it was trying to protect its eyes from extremely bright lights from the intense spotlight and high beams. Will immediately turned off the high beams and spotlight while leaving the low beams on. Will watched the large Bigfoot walk to the creature in the middle of the road. Will watched as the adult male reached down and grabbed the creature in the middle of the road by its shoulder, while Will was doing his best to protect the two creatures and shield them with his tractor from any potential oncoming traffic. As soon as the smaller creature stood up, Will immediately realized it was not a dog or a bear. What he was actually looking at was a juvenile Bigfoot, presumably the offspring of the larger male. The little Bigfoot was much more agile than the larger male. As soon as the adult grabbed its shoulder, it stood up and squirmed free before running further up the road, away from the adult Bigfoot. It was scooting away from its father. Will had seen this before with his own children. It was the universal display of an unsubordinate child. The young Bigfoot was acting just as his girls did when they were young. Every time the adult Bigfoot neared the child, it ran just far enough to stay out of the adult's reach. Will watched with a wide range of emotions. He was in shock and awe from the discovery that Bigfoot is indeed a real, very real creature. He also felt a connection to the creature, having already raised 3 kids of his own. Will had been in the Bigfoot's shoes before, so to speak. He remembered chasing stubborn kids from the farm and getting the cold shoulder from them. He softly chuckled out loud to himself as he watched the cat and mouse game unfold between father and son. Kids will be kids, he thought to himself. With the wide array of emotions he was feeling, there wasn't a moment where Will felt that he was in danger, not once. The Bigfoot seemed completely indifferent to his presence. He simply wanted to get his child and be on his way. While Will was slightly chuckling at the scene in front of him, something in his peripheral vision caught his eye. There was something directly next to him. Will casually looked to his left and discovered only 2 feet from his face another massive Bigfoot. It was more than apparent that his Bigfoot was a female. She had large breasts and a slightly different physique than the male. Will was eye to eye with this massive female Bigfoot. She was so close he could smell her, which he described as more of a gamey smell than an extreme offensive odor, which is a common description of Bigfoot scents. With the interior spotlight of the tractor pointing into Will's lap, he was positive that the female Bigfoot could clearly see him. As for Will, the female was standing completely illuminated by the lights of the tractor. She was completely visible from every minute detail up. He wouldn't have been able to see her any clearer during the daytime. The female was very tall. Will measured her eye level on the tractor and discovered that her eyes stood 7'4" above the ground. She was covered in matted, stringy brown, gray, and reddish brown hair. She also had a patch of long, stringy hairs growing from her chin. Will immediately gave the female Bigfoot a huge and happy smile. The creature smiled back at Will, or at least Will felt that she was smiling back. As she smiled, her teeth were exposed, and Will noticed what he referred to as a dental anomaly, but truthfully, he is not sure since it was the first Bigfoot he had ever seen. The female's teeth were either double-rowed, or she had a deep crevice or crack in her teeth that gave the impression of 2 rows of teeth. Will could not only hear the female Bigfoot breathing, but he could feel it. The breasts of the creature were massive in volume. It was not heavy or labored breathing. She simply inhaled massive quantities of air with every breath. He then smiled again and asked the female, "Is the baby okay?" Now Will is the rough and rugged type from Texas. He was raised on a farm and became a farmer himself. He is a no-fuss and no-grub gruff type of guy. He is also the proud owner of a very large and very full beard. Will watched as the female Bigfoot smiled back again and gently reached into the cab of his tractor. He watched as her long and hairy arms and fingers slowly came closer and closer to his face until she was touching him. Will's beard runs down to the middle of his chest and is multicolored with gray, red, and brown whiskers speckled throughout it. The female Bigfoot gently stroked Will's long beard. He felt a sense of calmness emanating out of the creature while she stroked his long beard. It was then that Will realized his head and the head of the male Bigfoot was extremely similar. He looked at the large female Bigfoot. She slowly removed her hand from the inside of the cab. Will's next decision proves that he is a much braver man than I. Will cautiously extended his hand out of the cab toward the female Bigfoot. She reached forwards, grasping Will's hand in hers, and gently placed her other hand on top of the back of the Will's hand, delicately sandwiching it between hers. Will had always considered himself a man of large stature. He wears size 13 boots, and he has been able to palm a basketball since middle school, but his hands were childlike in her massive palms, which were easily 2 by 3 times as large. In the next few moments, Will had a truly once-in-a-lifetime connection. He looked deep into the creature's eyes and watched as her eyes started to water. It was then that she gave what Will called a very soulful look. Although they did not share a language, they still managed to communicate. Their communication was not verbal. No, it was the most raw and quintessential form of communication there is. The conveyance of emotion. In that moment, Will felt that he clearly understood what the female was hoping to convey. Will perceived her intentions as a kind thank you, a thank you for not running over her child, and for helping in the small way that he did. Or perhaps it was simply a thank you for being peaceful and not trying to shoot down the Bigfoots. He could sense much more than simply an animal intelligence. What he shared with the creature he described as a very real and human-like, lending credibility to the belief that Bigfoot is much more of a person than an animal. By the time the female let go of Will's hand, the male Bigfoot had managed to gain control over his insubordinate child. The male was easily a good foot taller than the female and considerably stockier. Will watched as the male Bigfoot walked off of the highway and towards the tree line, carrying his child in his arms. As it got to the tree line, Will spotted 3 more Bigfoots, of which he believes there were even more that he couldn't see, waiting for the large male of his family. They all ranged in varying sizes, but they all paled in comparison to the large male. Will immediately went home and wrote down every detail of his bizarre encounter. He has not seen a Bigfoot since, but he hopes that he bumps into his furry family friends again. His encounter is one of the more amazing and beautiful encounters I have ever researched. It is very comforting to know that there are some very warm, friendly, and peaceful Bigfoots out there. Oh, that was a good one. Okay, I'll read one more for you guys. This encounter, his name's Dean. Dean is one of the most interesting characters I've ever had the pleasure of speaking with. Upon first glance, he is a mountain man by all accounts. He wears camouflage almost exclusively, has a beard, and runs to his belly and stands at an impressive 6'4", 6'4", with a proportionally large frame. However, upon entering the cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains that Dean has called home for the past 11 years, you discover a completely different side of Dean. The insides of the log cabin are what one may expect to find more or less. The musky smell of a room that needs a good airing. out is the first thing you'd meet. You fall by the large stuffed buck's head that sits above the wood stove. But it is in sharp contrast to 3 diplomas hanging from his walls, including a doctorate in mathematics, hundreds of books that line the many bookshelves of his cabin. Yes, Dean is a very interesting character with a very interesting story. Dean, being an extremely savvy investor, retired early after doing some contracting abroad for various engineering companies. He had been living in the remote wilderness of the Blue Ridge Mountains near the West Virginia border for well over a decade. His story takes place over the fall of 2005. Dean lives a simple life and tries to live off the land as much as possible. As a result, Dean has become a very avid hunter. He owns a large plot of land in the mountains and spends as much time in the wooded mountainside hunting game. He already had hunted his land for a few years before the strange occurrences began back in 2005. It started on a particularly beautiful autumn day in late October. The leaves were colored in the beautiful pastels of fall, and crisp autumn wind periodically ran through the forest. The mountain had already had its first freeze, and Dean was busy preparing for the long winter ahead. He was on a mission to bag one more deer before November, and he had been spending several days and nights in various makeshift camps throughout his land. This particular autumn morning started with a bit of excitement. Shortly after Dean's morning coffee and breakfast, he spotted what appeared to be a bear cub about 50 yards away from a downhill. Although Dean could not see the bear cub clearly, it was the only animal that fit the bill in the area, either that or a very large dog. He watched for a while as the cub rolled around on the ground and in the tall grass. Dean was enjoying watching the little guy having so much carefree fun when he saw some movement in the brush a ways beyond the cub. He grabbed his high-powered scope to get a better look. He peered through the scope towards the movement and saw a man in camouflage stalking the cub. Dean immediately let a round loose in the air. "You there? Yeah, you. This is private property. You ain't welcome to hunt my land. You leave that cub alone now and just go on and get." There was a few things that bothered Dean more than people trespassing on his land to hunt. Of those things, poaching is at the top of the list, and the bear season was still a few weeks away. Besides being the wrong season to shoot a bear, killing a cub is illegal if it is accompanied by another bear. Chances are there was a mama bear nearby. Dean had no tolerance for illegal poachers on his land. He watched as the hunter disappeared, and after about 5 minutes, Dean heard the crack of the hunter's rifle far in the distance. Once he was convinced that the trespasser was gone, Dean headed out to start his deer hunt. Now Dean is a versatile hunter and prefers deer stalking instead of hunting from a deer stand, but he still utilizes the several deer stands throughout his land. He explained that he usually uses the deer stands when the wind is sporadic and active. And on that morning, the wind was exactly that. With the wind ripping the frail leaves from the trees overhead, Dean headed to a deer stand he had built about a half a mile from his camp to the east. He set off on his way, but something felt strange. Well, once I got about a quarter of a mile away from the camp, I started getting this real weird feeling that I was being watched, Every hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I tried to ignore it, but it was giving me some serious butterflies. Now the Blue Ridge Mountains are not known for wolves or mountain lions, but in the last few weeks, Dean had heard several reports of a mountain lion in the area, and a few years before someone had captured photos of a red wolf on a game camera. Although these predators officially no longer inhabit the area, according to Fish and Game, the reality was that people were still seeing them. As Dean made his way to the tree stand, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The more he walked, the more convinced he became that an animal was stalking him. And the more he thought about it, the more he started to wonder if it wasn't the mountain lion that had been spotted, or perhaps even worse, was it the poacher he had seen earlier. Dean had dealt with poachers in the past, and the reality is that they always seem much more concerned with escape than confrontation. So he leaned more toward the mountain lion. After a long walk through the woods, Dean finally arrived at his deer stand and prepared for a day of deer hunting. A few hours passed, and Dean had not seen a deer or even a squirrel from that matter. He was debating whether he should make his way to his next hunting hole or wait out the day. He climbed out of the deer stand and immediately felt the eyes on him again. He surveyed his surroundings. He was deep in the remote wilderness of the Blue Ridge Mountains without a human around for miles except maybe a poacher. He took his high-power rifle with its high-powered scope and carefully surveyed his surroundings. After a few minutes of searching the area, Dean convinced himself that it was just his imagination. He packed up his hunting gear and headed back to his morning camp to grab his belongings for the long trek to his next hunting hole. When Dean arrived at the camp, he discovered that something had disturbed the campsite. His canned goods and salted meats had been pulled down from the branch that was about 12 feet from the forest floor. The contents had been emptied onto the floor, and a large package of deer jerky was missing. Dean was dumbfounded. What kind of animal would do this? Dean wondered to himself as he surveyed the campsite. He had dealt with several bears visiting his camps before, but this was very different. Bears leave a path of destruction when they pass through, but the only thing touched in his campsite was his bag of canned goods and dried meats. He had a large duffel bag that contained a spare ration of deer jerky and a big bag of brown sugar that was untouched. Upon further inspection, he discovered that there was no evidence of a bear anywhere. He inspected the tree that the bag was perched in, expecting to find claw marks from a bear climbing the tree, but there were none. Whatever raided his camp knew exactly what they were after, and they got it without creating any damage. It was almost human-like. That was when Dean got a horrible chill down his spine. Was it a poacher? For the most part, Dean's neighbors, though very away from, were very friendly and honest folk. However, deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, you can bump into some pretty interesting characters, the type of characters most of us only meet on an episode of Criminal Minds or CSI. The type of people that make their annual income illegally poaching or running illegal stills, making moonshine. In short, there were a few lawless and dangerous people in the area. Although Dean knew his hunting area like the back of his hand, it was way too large to monitor at all times. He started to wonder if a bootlegger had built a still on his land when he started to get nervous. The last thing Dean wanted was a surprise encounter with an armed man trying to hide a secret in a legal still. When a poacher was more inclined to flee, a bootlegger may be more inclined to defend his still and its secret location. There were even stories of bootleggers murdering the poor souls who unexpectedly wander upon their stills. Dean sat down on a log and looked over the campsite. No claw marks or animal tracks anywhere. His belongings relatively untouched. with the exception of the bag of canned goods and dry meat, and whatever raided his camp was capable of retrieving the bag from a 12-foot perch. Dean slowly became convinced that the only intruder capable of pulling off the campsite raid was a human. His first thought was to return to the log cabin, but unfortunately Dean didn't have the luxury of doing so. Winter was around the corner and the needed to bag a deer. He packed up his stuff, loaded his gear on his back, and then screamed at the top of his lungs into the woods, "If someone's out there, let it be known that I am no concern of yours, and you are no concern of mine. I'm leaving the area, it's all yours." He then quickly started on the path to his next hunting hole due east. By the time Dean arrived at his camp, on the east side of his property, it was nearing dusk. He set up camp, making sure to pack the last of his food very securely and prepared for sleep. Dean's several camps were constructed of the various materials Dean was able to scavenge on the area, meaning his lodgings were usually a ragtag combination of dead fallen trees, branches, and rudimentary logs he sculpted with his chainsaw. But every lodging had a roof and a door of some sort. Dean tightly secured the door behind him and went to sleep. The following morning, Dean walked out of his hunting shack and froze dead in his tracks. He had unknowingly and entertained yet another guest over the course of the night. Once again, his bag of food had been taken from its high perch and rummaged through, but there was something else especially intriguing this time. The packages of food were neatly stacked, one on top of the other. Next to the stacked packages of food was a pile of rocks that had also been neatly stacked, one on top of each other in equal height with the food packages. The most peculiar thing was that there were several acorns resting on top of the stacked rocks. He inventoried his food packages and discovered that a package of oats was gone. Like the day before, the rest of his camp was untouched. Dean's body was soon covered in goosebumps. He was more certain now than ever that he was dealing with a human being. Whether it was homeless vagabond, a crazy hermit, an illegal poacher, or a lawless bootlegger, Dean was convinced he was being stalked and followed. Then he felt it again, eyes watching him. Dean screamed into the woods as loud as he could. "I got no quarrel with you. Just go on now. Be on your way. This is my land and trespassing is not permitted. Just go ahead and get." The forest responded in silence. Dean sighed and packed his stuff for the hunt ahead. But before heading out, he surveyed the area thoroughly. When he was sure that nobody was watching, he stealthily holstered his .44 Magnum hunting handgun with the scope in his chest holster, making sure it was well concealed. He then started mile hiking to his hunting hole. Just like the day before, Dean couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The wind was pretty calm, so he decided to take his ground game and do some deer stalking. The morning was relatively uneventful, but by the afternoon, Dean was hot on the trail of a deer. He was caught up in the moment. He didn't realize that he had ventured out of his hunting land and into unknown terrain. It was during the deer stalking when the noises began. The noises started with loud knocks of wood on wood, as though someone very strong was banging large logs against the tree trunks. They echoed from one side of the forest to the other, almost as though they were some sort of signal to determine location. Not sure what to make of the sounds, Dean was starting to grow nervous again, but he hadn't seen deer in days, and this may be one of his last chances to bag a deer before the hunting season was over. He couldn't abandon the hunt. He continued to venture deeper and deeper into unknown terrain, stalking his prey, and the wood knocking continued. Then out of nowhere, an empty Ziploc plastic bag, rolled past him in the wind. It was one of his deer jerky bags. He picked up the bag and saw that it had been ripped open from the sides instead of the ziplock. Why would someone open a bag this way? He wondered to himself. He was busy inspecting the bag when he heard something on the ridge above him. Dean carefully crept closer to the ridge and peered up to the plot. Above him, walking along the high point of the ridge toward the west, were two men carrying rifles and several milk jugs full of a clear liquid. Bootleggers. The reality is that Dean had no idea if these men were violent or not. However, a good rule of thumb is that you do not want to surprise a bootlegger at or near his secret still. Convinced he had discovered his stalkers and unwilling to learn if they were friendly or not, Dean waited for them to pass in silence. Once the bootleggers were out of sight, Dean decided it was time to get back to his log cabin. He needed a bag of deer, but it would serve no purpose if he disappeared in the woods. He looked around to orient himself and get his bearings when it became abundantly clear. He was in unfamiliar terrain and had no idea where he was. He had broken a cardinal rule of hunting and didn't know how to get back to camp. He was lost. The only thing he was sure of was that his camp was due west, the same direction the bootleggers were heading. He decided to give the bootleggers a good head start to avoid bumping into them. Now all he had to do was wait. He got on his belly, crawled underneath an overhanging ledge that was nearly touching the ground, and disappeared into its shadows. He figured 30 minutes should do the trick. While waiting in his very well hidden place, Dean heard the very distinctive sound of footsteps approaching. His hiding place greatly reduced his visibility, but he was able to see the forest floor. He watched in silence as a massive set of hairy feet appeared. They were covered in long, stringy black gray hairs, and they were huge. The feet paused for a moment in front of his hiding place before disappearing out of sight. Within moments, a second pair of large feet appeared, followed by a third pair that were equally as hairy but considerably smaller. They were a child's feet. Dean had heard the various stories of vagabond wild men that roamed the mountains, but he had never heard of the family wild men. Things became more complicated, and Dean desperately wanted to get back to his log cabin. He couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed his gear and climbed out from under the overhanging ledge and headed west. After walking for about an hour, Dean came to a large clearing with a creek that ran through it in a small valley. The terrain was very rocky with steep cliffs on both sides. That's when he heard the crack of a rifle, which was immediately followed by a small explosion about 15 yards in front of him. Someone had shot a rifle at him. He ducked down and looked over for cover. "We got you in sights. Go ahead and just come out of there real slow. Now, okay?" A voice echoed off the rocky walls of the valley. Dean's bootleggers had spotted him. In hindsight, truth be told, it was just as possible that the bootleggers were just trying to scare him away from the area of their still, as it was that they were planning on helping him disappear in the woods, but he had no interest in finding out what their intentions were. Dean called back to the men, "I have no interest in you or what you're doing out here. I'm heading back to my camp and then home. Just let me go in peace." He listened for a response, but only heard silence. The silence was soon shattered by a crack of a rifle, followed by an explosion about 20 yards away from Dean. "Go on then, get," the voice called back. Dean wasn't keen on exposing himself, but he was less keen on waiting for the bootleggers to venture down into the valley. He grabbed his hunting handgun and slowly emerged from hiding. He dared not look back at the men while he cautiously headed west. He had walked only 15 feet or so before he heard the crack of the rifle again. His heart stopped and a bullet exploded into the rocky ground about 10 feet to his left. Fear consumed Dean. He wasn't sure if it was another warning shot to instill fear, or if it was a botched kill shot. Either way, Dean fled as fast as he could. He will never forget the next thing that happened. Dean had only made a few strides before a loud and thunderous roar echoed through the valley. It was the loudest thing Dean had ever heard in his life, even louder than the shots of the rifle. It sounded like a lion's roar, but much louder, and it ended with a gurgle of sorts. Following the roar were some incoherent shouts and screams, and then loud crack of rifle. The roar echoed through the forest again, and then there was silence. Dean waited a few minutes before finding the courage to look back toward the valley he had just left. When he finally did peek toward the rocky ledge, he saw two massive silhouettes, one considerably larger than the other, standing at the top of the ridge where the bootleggers had just been. From the position of the sun and the shade from the trees, Dean couldn't see the figures clearly, but from what he could see, they were very, very big, and they were looking in his direction. The larger of the two then cocked its head slightly toward the sky, and within moments Dean heard the eerie and loud thunderous roar echo through the valley. Enough was enough. Dean turned his high tail and ran as fast as he could. Bootleggers, poachers, massive creature that roar, nighttime visitors that take food and leave acorns in return. Well, simply put, a deer wasn't worth this much trouble. 20 years ago, Dean could have covered the distance between his camp and current location easily and with little effort, even at a run, and with full hunting gear in tow, but this wasn't 20 years ago. The wear and tear of the years had left Dean in less than ideal fleeing shape. He wasn't as nimble as he once was, as fast as he used to be. However, he managed to maintain run for well over an hour. He was heaving and gasping for air when he stopped running. Finally, Dean was back in his neck of the woods. He recognized his surroundings and knew that his camp was near. There were two ways to get back to his camp. He could take the laid-back scenic route and walk west and then south to his camp, or he could take a more difficult, more shorter route straight southwest and over a small cliff to his camp. As much as Dean was not up to scaling a small cliff, he was much more concerned with getting back to his cabin sooner than later. He opted for the direct southwest route. It is worth mentioning that Dean felt that he was being watched the entire time that he fled the Rocky Valley. This sense of being watched increased as he made his way toward the cliff. Every now and then, Dean paused and looked around but never saw anything. Eventually, Dean was looking at his campsite. It was 60 feet below him, and the only thing between him going back to the cabin was the 60-foot cliff. Very carefully, Dean started to descend down the rocky cliff face. Dean is nowhere near a mountain climber, but that doesn't mean he hasn't scaled his fair share of mountains. His lifestyle demands it. Dean was about 20 feet from the ground and had already scaled about 2/3 of the cliff when he lost his footing. He slid uncontrollably down the cliff face, and then everything became topsy-turvy, as Dean worded it. Felt like I was inside a dryer looking out. Everything as just turning in circles. Dean rolled and slid another 10 feet or so down the cliff, putting him about 10 feet above the ground, when everything came to a screeching halt and he felt a sharp pain in his ankle. As he gathered his wits, he discovered that he was looking at his camp, but it was upside down. Dean looked upwards and saw his right foot tightly wedged into a crack in the rock face, and below him was a hunting rifle laying on the ground. He had dropped it in his tumble. He was hanging by his ankle upside down, and he was stuck. Several minutes passed, and Dean unsuccessfully tried to free himself from his trapped position. Slowly, the reality of his predicament became abundantly clear. If he couldn't free himself, he would be he would most likely die out there. Dean is a tough man, he is a strong man, but that day, while he hung upside down, trapped by his ankle on the cliff face, Dean started to cry that this isn't how he wanted to die. Dean has no idea how long he was crying for, but at some point he had heard a very soft cooing sound. It came from very close by and sounded a lot like the cooing of a pigeon. He wiped the tears from his eyes and listened. Once again he heard that soft cooing and then heard it again. And then again. It was coming from varying locations and it sounded like it was coming from several different animals. The strange cooing went back and forth, lasting for no more than a minute or two. In the next moments, Dean's life would prove to be changed forever. To Dean's uttermost amazement and surprise, a massive creature emerged from behind a tree only 10 feet away from Dean. It was absolutely huge, and it was unlike any creature that Dean had ever seen. It walked on two legs. It stood at least 8 feet tall. It had a massive barrel chest that was at least 4 feet wide. And if Dean were to estimate its weight, he put this creature around 500 pounds or more. It was covered in black and gray hairs, and its feet, well, they were the same feet Dean had seen while hiding under the overhanging ledge. Dean was a man of logic and science. He had heard the stories, but always assumed it was simply part of rural and small-town mountain folklore, mythology for the modern man. But there was no denying what he was witnessing. Walking toward Dean was a massive creature that Dean can only describe as a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. He had spent years and years of his life hunting outdoors in Alaska, Montana, Washington State, and never once saw anything remotely intriguing or suggestive of the existence of Bigfoot. Never once did he see a track or hear any strange noises. He never in a million years suspected that he may actually encounter one of these creatures, and especially not in the Blue Ridge Mountains of West Virginia. Maybe it could happen in the Pacific Northwest, but definitely not here. Yet here he was in the Blue Ridge Mountains of West Virginia, and he was staring at a Bigfoot. The next few minutes were extremely remarkable. As the creature approached Dean, he could feel a soothing calmness over him. It wasn't Dean's calmness, definitely not seen since Dean hadn't had any calmness all day. It was coming from the Bigfoot. Dean easily could have taken his .44 Magnum out of the holster and unloaded a revolver into the Bigfoot's head or chest, but he didn't. He felt no need to harm the creature. As Dean explained it, there was something absolutely magical about it. I could almost feel its feelings. It's hard to explain. It's like it was communicating with me by way it felt, as if to say, "Hey bud, calm down, everything is okay." The Bigfoot walked right up to Dean. He gave him a reassuring look before he did anything. Dean reciprocated with a placid and peaceful smile. As soon as Dean reciprocated the Bigfoot's peaceful intentions, the creature reached up and grabbed Dean's stuck ankle. His ankle was somewhere between 10 to 12 feet above the ground, and the creature reached it as easily as someone grabbing a glass from a cupboard. He effortlessly unstuck poor old Dean and laid him softly on the ground. Dean looked up at the creature and without saying a word smiled at the Bigfoot. His eyes watered and he felt overfilled with a sense of gratitude. He watched the massive creature nonchalantly walk away. It was about 30 feet away when Dean saw two other Bigfoots, a large female and a small juvenile, emerge from hiding, and he listened as the three cooed back and forth before disappearing into the woods. As he watched them disappear, Dean had a moment of clarity. From this distance, the juvenile Bigfoot looked just like the bear cub he had saved from a poacher the other day. That was when it hit Dean. These creatures were not stalking him, they were watching him. Today, Dean still lives in his small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, packed with books and diplomas hanging from the wall. A lot of things have changed since Dean's encounter. He has made a habit of leaving deer jerky in burlap sacks hanging 10 to 15 feet in the trees above the ground, and sometimes he wakes up to find contents missing. He still gets to the sense that he is watched, sometimes in the woods, but now that feeling makes him feel safe, warm, instead of scared and paranoid. He refuses to put up any game cameras to catch proof of the creatures. In Dean's mind, he preferred that elusive creature remain hidden. He is convinced that the definitive proof of their existence would prove detrimental to the population. Instead, he prefers to keep his identity, story, and location of the sightings anonymous. I don't know much about these creatures, but what I do know is that there is a very healthy and happy family of Bigfoots living in the Blue Ridge Mountains, at least 3 of them, Dean said, parting. And that's the end of that chapter. A pretty interesting book. What did you guys think of it? Thank you guys for participating and listening in. Have a good night, everyone.